In your working folder, you're going to find one more document, and it is our flower, but it's a little bit different. It's called clipit.psd. I want to talk about something that is, in my opinion, being phased out, and I'm very happy, called the clipping path. I used to tell my students years and years ago, when the industry finally figured out a way to create transparency in other programs without me having to do a clipping path in Adobe Photoshop, I would dance in the pale moonlight. They're useful, but they're being phased out because most programs support transparency. For example, most applications today besides Photoshop will accept a PSD document, especially if you're working in Adobe products. But even some of the others will accept transparency. TIFFs support transparency. But there still might be a need, especially if you're going for color and you're going out to a press, where the operator might say, Andy, you got the flower isolated, cool, but I need a clipping path for it. And you go, well, what's that? Let me show you what a clipping path is. Hopefully, and I mean this seriously, you'll never have to use one. Now, I've already saved a little bit of time. If you go to paths, I already have a work path. So I've already made that path going around the flower. A couple of things to remember. To make a clipping path, it can't be a work path. It has to have a name. So I'm going to double click on work path and call it flower. If I go to this option right here, which is options for paths, one of my options is clipping path. Now that will be grayed out if you didn't give it a name. Go ahead and go to clipping path. In clipping path, there's the path. You could have more than one. Flatness is basically a number that controls the complexity of the document itself, because it is going to be vector. It's going to stay vector. If you leave it blank, it's kind of like recommended, do the best you can. So I usually leave that as blank. Now what I want you to watch is the word flower right there when I click OK. So keep your eyes down there. See how it changed? Okay, it got thicker. That means it's a clipping path. You say, well, nothing changed over here. It doesn't have to. Any device now that reads clipping paths will only see the flower, like a 4-color press. But you have to save it a particular way, and then you're done. If you go up to the word file on the pull-down menu and go down to, say, Save As, and go into the format, save it as a Photoshop EPS, encapsulated postscript. Give it a name, whatever you want. Go ahead and click Save. That's it. Now, any device that needs a clipping path to support the transparency option will read the clipping path, isolate all this stuff to transparency, and leave the flower. I don't really like them because they're harsh. I mean, they are vector. It's difficult, if not impossible, to do anything to them except cut them out like you're cutting them out with a pair of scissors. So if you need them, you got them. This chapter's been all about paths and shapes and vector. The more you practice with that pen tool, the better you're going to get with it. If you're like me and you grew up with programs like Illustrator or Freehand, you do have a leg up because the techniques are basically the same. And the more you practice with these tools, the better you're going to get. Paths and shapes, well, like I said at the beginning, Photoshop now has a split personality. It doesn't know if it's Illustrator and it doesn't know if it's Photoshop. It's a little bit of both. And I like the features of being able to control vector shapes or paths in Photoshop without going to Illustrator, which is what we used to do, to get finer control. Just remember, practice makes perfect.